Dumisa Ntsebeza is a former TRC commissioner. He joins us now to reflect on the life of Desmond Tutu. Thank you very much, sir, for your time this evening and for availing yourself. And speaking to Ms. Yasmin Suka earlier on, she spoke of an unfinished transition in South Africa and the unfinished business of the TRC. Mzwakhe Mbuli holding the same sentiments as well. I'd like to get your thought on these conversations that are being had or have been had about the TRC and the unfinished business.
Well, I mean, I've been part of the discussions about the unfinished business because in 1998, when we wrote our final report, there were certain recommendations that we made that the government, the executive, should see through, and those two areas which I want to explore with you are in the area of reparations as well as in the area of prostitutions. Firstly, with regard to prostitutions, you will know from all the discussions that have been taking place since the demise of the old man, that there was a recommendation or there was a provision in the Act that whoever applied for amnesty and didn't get amnesty, or whoever did not apply for amnesty for acts that in relation to which they should have applied for amnesty, they will be prosecuted. That was the law. So that in 1998, at the end of the period during which the Truth and Reconciliation Commission operated, there were certain recommendations that we made in relation to prosecutions that ought to have been taken against those who had failed to get amnesty. Because, you see, you could get amnesty if you met the conditions for the granting of amnesty. If you didn't meet those conditions because perhaps you came to the TRC, gave the TRC Amnesty Committee a tissue of lies by not making a full disclosure, or the acts in relation to which you wanted amnesty were not acts that had a political motive behind them, then you would be prosecuted. You know, what we now know is that since 1998 to date, there have been a minimal number of prosecutions, as to call them no prosecutions at all. So there has been a betrayal of that commitment. There has been a betrayal of the very provision in the Act that said, if you didn't apply, if you applied for amnesty, you didn't get amnesty, or if you did not apply for amnesty when you ought to have applied for amnesty, you'd be prosecuted. So the question that we now must ask is, why did our government not prosecute those who ought to have been prosecuted? The NPA, why did it not do its task? That's the one aspect. The other aspect, of course, is the area of reparations. You will know that we had recommended something like, not compensation in the traditional sense, but we had said those people who had made themselves available and had come to the TRC and had been identified by that process as victims of gross violations of human rights or any other violations of their human rights, which, then they would be entitled to some measure of reparations. We know that we recommended something like 2,000 rand per month for 6 years. Now, I mean, that is nothing compared with what general damages sometimes are for people who have been tortured, who had been, subjected to severe ill treatment. But we were quite happy to make that recommendation. You know, what the Archbishop called the once-off tax, you know, that government should make a provision for about, I think it would have come to something like 6.5 billion rands. And that would have, you know, eased and that would have also have given dignity to those people who had come forward, had identified themselves as victims, and had therefore qualified to be given reparations. What did our government do? They kicked that in the teeth, in the sense that, you know, they did not accept our recommendation for 2,000 rand a month for 6 years or so, which would have been, as I say, come to 6.5 billion rands thereabouts. But they decided on a once-off payment of 30,000 rand. You know, that was an insult. So
on the issue, please, sir, on the issue of prosecutions, you speak of a betrayal of this commitment. What do you perceive has been the consequence of this betrayal?
Is that, you know, there are thugs there who are out there who need to be prosecuted, and they are not prosecuted. And the question is, we are not getting an answer. In fact, the Archbishop just recently, you know, in an effort or in a campaign headed by the Foundation for Human Rights, where, you know, Commissioner Yasmin Suka was the executive director, and the executive director now is Mr. Hanif Ali, who was also our legal advisor in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He's now the executive director in the Foundation for Human Rights. We have mounted a campaign to say, why is it that there were no prosecutions? We are even calling for a commission of inquiry to establish the reasons why there have not been any prosecutions. And the Archbishop was one of the signatories in his capacity as a former commissioner in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So this was somebody who was interested in justice until his last day. And that is how I would want people to remember him, because there's a lot of talk about how he did not carry out what the TRC was all about. And I think that is coming from people who actually don't understand, one, what the mandate of the TRC was, and B, and two, what the Archbishop himself did in furtherance of what was the mandate. We did everything. And as I say, until recently, he was a signatory to a call for a commission of inquiry to be instituted by the current president to establish why prosecutions that should have taken place did not take place, and we're still waiting. Unfortunately, the Archbishop will not be here to see what the outcome of that petition by us who were truth commissioners is going to be.
Another commission of inquiry, it's quite a costly exercise. You speak of the issue of reparations and how you had recommended that people get a certain amount over a number of years. That money going to another commission of inquiry, and also those resources and that pain again resurfacing. There's so much to this. So how would you respond to a thought that says, do we really need another commission of inquiry?
Well, the thing about commissions of inquiry is that they gather the facts, so that, especially if that commission, if the hearings are going to be in public, then at least the entire community is going to be part and parcel of understanding the reasons, if there are any, why certain things didn't happen when they ought to have happened, or why certain things happened when they ought not to have happened. The thing about commissions of inquiry, or the terms of reference of the commissions of inquiry, may have to provide, because they will be legislated into commissions of inquiry are in terms of the Commissions Act. Now, the terms of reference would have to make specific provisions that recommendations of the nature that may come out should be of a nature that can be implemented. Because once you make recommendations and there's nothing that's going to come out of that, then it's a useless exercise. So I think the more we learn about what the recommendations in terms of commissions of inquiry amount to in the end, the better we can find tools to make sure that the recommendations will not only be binding, but will have to have, the executive supporting them to the extent that they are able to be verified for what they recommend.
Former TRC Commissioner Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza, thank you for your time this evening.